They called him the Young Wolf, but after that day, they started calling him something else, the Butcher of Casterly Rock. It started with Jaime Lannister. When Robb Stark first captured Jaime during the war in the Riverlands, he treated him like a prize, a bargaining chip. Everyone expected Robb to hold Jaime for a trade, for Sansa and Arya maybe. But after hearing what happened to his father, and how Joffrey had laughed while Ned Stark's head was cut off, something inside Robb changed. No more honor, no more playing by the rules. Catelyn tried to stop him. She begged her son to think politically. She said, "He's a Lannister, yes, but killing him will only make things worse." But Robb had stared at the fire all night. He didn't sleep. He didn't blink. In the morning, he walked into Jaime's tent with Grey Wind beside him, and he took his sword out. Jaime had smiled when Robb entered, maybe thinking it was a visit. But when the sword came down, all that charm disappeared. Robb didn't give him a speech. He didn't say why. He just swung once, and it was over. The Kingslayer was dead. Word spread fast. Riverrun fell silent. Edmure Tully, the Blackfish, even Rose Bolton, stood stunned. They weren't sure if it was brave or mad, but Robb wasn't done. He sent scouts west. "Fast, riders!" He gave one order. "Find every Lannister breathing. Bring them to me." And they did. Dozens of them, Bannerman cousins, knights who served House Lannister, were caught during the chaos of war. Some surrendered, some ran. Some tried to buy their freedom. Robb didn't care. In the next week at the Twins, he lined them up in the courtyard. One by one, they kneeled before him. One by one, he took their heads. Even Catelyn couldn't watch. She locked herself in her chambers, crying for the boy she had raised. The boy who once laughed in Winterfell's halls, who loved stories of honor and knighthood. That boy was gone. The Northmen, though. They cheered. They called it justice. For Ned, for the children of Winterfell. For every northerner who had bled under a lion's banner. The Karstarks raised their cups high. The Great John kissed Robb's hand. They said, "This is the king in the north we need." But behind their cheers was something else, fear, because Robb had broken every rule of war. There would be no peace now, no chance of ransom, no noble mercy. And Tywin Lannister, he was still alive. Robb had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The Raven reached Casterly Rock at nightfall. Tywin Lannister was in his war tent, reading reports from Harrenhal when the message came. His old hands moved slowly as he opened the scroll, but the words inside hit him like a sword through the chest. Jaime Lannister is dead, executed by Robb Stark. Dozens of House Lannister's knights followed. More are being hunted. The North shows no mercy. For the first time in years, Tywin's face lost color. His golden lion rings trembled slightly on his fingers. His son, his heir, his legacy. Gone, not in battle, but butchered like a criminal. Tywin didn't shout. He didn't cry. He just stood there, silent still. Then he turned to the young Lannister bannerman standing nearby and said in a voice cold as snow, "Send word to every loyal house in the west. Tell them, war is no longer about honor or thrones. It's vengeance now." He burned the letter in the fire. The next week, the Westerlands exploded. What Robb had done wasn't just a blow to House Lannister. It was a declaration of blood war. Tywin emptied the rock of its gold and started hiring sellswords from Essos, the Golden Company, free companies from Lys and Tyrosh, even cutthroats from the Stepstones who fought for coin and nothing else. He didn't just want to beat the Starks. He wanted to erase them, but Robb wasn't waiting. He marched west toward Lannisport, faster than anyone expected. Town after town fell as the northern banners rose. But something was changing in the young wolf. His eyes had grown darker, his voice quieter. Every time a Lannister lord was captured, he gave the same order: hang them, even if they were old men, even if they begged, even if they'd never held a sword. Once, a Lannister squire, no older than 15, was brought to him. The boy was crying, shaking so hard he could barely stand. Robb looked at him for a long time. The northern soldiers waited, expecting mercy. Instead, Robb said, "He carries the lion. That's enough." And they hanged the boy. Some of his own bannermen started whispering. The Great John tried to speak with him one night, drunk on ale, saying, "My king, war is one thing, but this, killing every cub in the den?" Robb didn't answer. He just walked away. Catelyn stopped trying to advise him. She had lost Bran and Rickon. She didn't know where Arya was. Sansa was still trapped in King's Landing. And now her son, her only son, was becoming a stranger. Meanwhile, in King's Landing, Queen Cersei was losing her mind. When she heard of Jaime's death, she shattered a wine goblet against the wall and screamed until her throat bled. She locked herself in the Red Keep for days. She refused food. She cursed her guards. Her golden lion armor was hung above her bed, but she wept beneath it like a broken girl. Joffrey, ever the fool, laughed at the news at first. "Robb Stark thinks he's a hero," he said. "I'll send him Sansa's head in return." But even he grew quiet when the news came that Robb had taken Castle and was now only a week from Casterly Rock itself. Tyrion tried to speak reason. "We must broker peace," he told the small council. "Send terms, offer gold, even offer lands. If we keep fighting like this, we'll all drown in blood." But Cersei refused. "No peace with wolves," she said. "I want his head. I want it on a spike." But that was the thing. Nobody could stop Robb Stark anymore. He moved like a storm, striking fast, not holding territory, just destroying. For every Lannister bannerman killed, he had their keep burned. Gold was melted. Fields were salted. The people of the Westerlands began to flee their own homes, not from Tywin's enemies, but from Robb Stark himself. He had become something else. Not a king, not even a man of vengeance. He was a curse now. At Casterly Rock, Tywin made his last stand. He ordered the gates sealed, the high cliffs guarded. Thousands of archers lined the walls. Siege towers burned oil day and night. He told his men, "If the North wants our blood, they'll have to drown in it first," and then the horns blew. Robb Stark stood at the bottom of the Golden Cliffs, looking up at the home of House Lannister. His face was covered in ash and dirt. Grey Wind stood beside him, growling like a beast ready for war, and for the first time in 7 kingdoms, the mighty rock trembled. The siege of Casterly Rock began not with fire, but with silence. For 3 long days, Robb Stark made no move. His army camped below the towering cliffs, thousands of tents lining the coast like a second sea. The northern banners flapped in the salty wind, the direwolf of House Stark, blood red on grey, staring up at the lion's den. Inside the rock, Tywin waited. He knew every inch of this fortress, the tunnels, the hidden chambers, the blind spots in the cliffs. Casterly Rock had never fallen, not once in history, and he would not be the Lannister to let it. But still, something twisted in his gut. Robb Stark was not fighting like a king anymore, not even like a general. He was fighting like a ghost with nothing to lose. On the 4th day, the drums started, low and steady, boom, boom, boom. The North had brought siege ladders, catapults, even black barrels of wildfire, stolen from the Riverlands and repurposed by Northern engineers. No longer did they march with honor or banners raised high. They came with wolves painted in mud and ash across their armor, and hatred carved into every blade. When they climbed fast. When they fell, they rose again. And when they breached the outer gates on the 2nd night, the blood didn't stop flowing for hours. Tywin fought from the walls. His white lion armor still gleamed, but his sword hand was slower now, older. His men saw him, and it gave them strength, but not enough. The Northerners didn't come for gold. They didn't come for glory. They came to kill every Lannister they found. Robb Stark never entered through the gates. He came from the sea, using small boats at night. He and a group of elite scouts rode around the cliffs and climbed the narrow sea path Jaime once used to sneak out as a boy. Only a few remembered it. Robb found them and paid them in promises. He climbed through the blackness, soaked in salt water and blood. By the time the doors of the lower hold opened from within, the fighting above had already reached the throne room. Robb didn't speak. He moved through the halls like a shadow. Grey Wind walked ahead of him, eyes glowing, mouth wet with blood. The Lannister servants dropped to their knees or ran. None were spared. Every golden lion hanging on the walls was ripped down and burned, and then he found Tywin. Burned, and then he found Tywin. The old lion stood alone in the rock's war chamber, maps scattered, hands clenched behind his back. When he turned and saw Robb, face hard, sword drawn, he didn't flinch. "So," Tywin said, calm as ever. "You've come to end the lion's line." Robb stared at him. "You ended it yourself the day you sent your men to murder children." "You've killed dozens of my kin," Tywin said. "Some barely grown. And yet I did not stoop to butchery." Robb stepped closer. "You killed my father. You butchered my sister's futures. You set fire to the north and called it strategy." Tywin's lips twitched. "I called it survival." Robb raised his sword. "Then survive this." But Tywin didn't move. He simply looked Robb in the eyes and said, "When you kill me, boy, know this. You have become what you hate, and you will die alone." And that's when Robb struck. No trial, no words. Just a single clean blow. The head of Tywin Lannister rolled across the stone floor of Casterly Rock, and with it, the Lion of the West, the man who had ruled from behind thrones, controlled kings, and built empires, was gone. The North roared. They looted the rock. Every vault was emptied. Gold melted and reforged into Stark coin. The lion's sigils were burned in the streets. Lannister blood covered the stone walls, dripping into the sea below. But something strange happened after the victory. The people of the Westerlands did not rise in rebellion. They bent the knee. Why? Because Tywin had ruled through fear, through gold, through pressure. And now that fear had been crushed by something even colder, Robb Stark's wrath. The villagers in the Reach began calling him the Direwolf King. Mothers told their children, "Sleep now or the Northern Ghost will come." But not everyone was cheering. At Riverrun, Catelyn Stark received a raven. When she read the message, she dropped the parchment. "Casterly Rock has fallen. Tywin is dead. The West is ours. Tell the world, the Lannisters are no more." She wept, not for the Lannisters, but for her son. She knew now that the boy she had raised in Winterfell was gone. In his place stood something darker, something colder, something carved from grief and fire and blood. And in King's Landing, chaos erupted. Cersei collapsed when she heard her father was dead. She screamed at the Maesters, tore out her own hair, and then vanished from the court for days. Joffrey flew into a rage. He ordered Sansa Stark brought before him and beat her until his own knights had to pull him back. He ordered new banners hung, red lions with swords instead of tails, symbols of vengeance. Not rule, but the truth couldn't be stopped. With Tywin gone and Jaime executed, House Lannister had no anchor left. Only a mad boy king. Only chaos. And across the sea in the smoky halls of Dragonstone, Stannis Baratheon smiled. Snow had started to fall, not in flurries, not lightly, but thick, endless sheets of white. Like the North itself was trying to remind its son of where he belonged, but Robb Stark didn't care. He stood at the edge of the western cliffs, staring out over the sea below Casterly Rock. The wind howled around him, cutting through his armor, but he didn't move. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, not looking for ships, not even thinking of home, just searching for something he couldn't name. Behind him, the rock was silent. Its halls were filled with smoke and burnt flesh. The last of the Lannister guards had been hunted down. The gold was gone. The lion banners had been used for kindling. But the Northmen, they were restless. They had won, but it didn't feel like a victory. Men drank and sang, yes, but their eyes were hollow. Some whispered that the gods would curse them for what had been done. Others said Robb had become no different than the Mad King himself, burning cities, executing children, leading through fear. And worse yet, Roose Bolton had gone quiet. He had taken half the army and returned to Harrenhal under the excuse of securing the Riverlands. But the truth was clearer than ever. Bolton was watching, waiting. He saw the change in Robb, and he didn't like it. Back in the camp, Grey Wind had become more vicious. The direwolf no longer let anyone near Robb, not even Catelyn. He growled at the maesters, lunged at servants, tore through one soldier who touched Robb's tent without permission. It was like the beast had sensed it too. The darkness inside the young wolf was no longer hidden. One night, a northern scout returned from the Vale. He brought news that shook the war camp. Lady Lisa Arryn had shut her gates. The Vale would send no aid, no soldiers, no gold, no support. "We are done bleeding for lions and wolves," the message said. Robb read it in silence, then tossed the letter into the fire. Later that same night, Maester Tywin from Riverrun approached him with a parchment marked by the Baratheon seal. "From Dragonstone," he said. "Stannis sends his regards. End his terms." Robb opened it. "You have broken the lion's back. Now kneel, and together we will shatter the throne. Join me, Robb Stark. I am the rightful king. But Westeros is large enough for us both. The North can be yours if you swear your sword." For a moment, just a moment, something flickered in Robb's face. A way out, a future. But then his eyes turned hard again. "No," he said. "I will not kneel to fire and shadow." And so the letter was burned. But Stannis wasn't the only one watching. Across the narrow sea, spies whispered the news to a silver-haired queen in exile. Daenerys Targaryen, mother of dragons, heard of the fall of the rock and the extinction of the lion. She smiled, but her advisors frowned. "He grows too fast," Ser Jorah warned. "Robb Stark is not a boy anymore. He's a butcher king now. And Westeros may fear him more than they ever feared your father." Still, Daenerys whispered one word to her dragons. Soon, back in the Westerlands, rebellion began to stir. The minor houses, those who had bent the knee after the fall of the rock, were growing bolder. They refused northern taxes. They hid surviving Lannisters. One village even hung northern soldiers from the gates in secret. Robb sent riders to punish them, and the riders never returned. The war wasn't over. It had only changed shape. Then came the most bitter blow. At Riverrun, Catelyn received word from a travelling bard, news that Sansa Stark had been married to Tyrion Lannister before the fall of the rock. The marriage hadn't been consummated, but legally, by the eyes of the crown, she was still a lion's wife. Robb was silent when he heard it, but Catelyn saw his hands trembling. "She didn't choose that life," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She wore a lion's cloak," Robb replied. Catelyn stepped back. "You wouldn't—" But he said nothing. The next morning he ordered his fastest riders to King's Landing, not to offer peace, but to bring back Sansa, alive or dead. That night, it snowed heavier than ever. The northern camp was buried in white, like the gods were trying to wash away all the blood. But the red still seeped through the snow, thick and warm. Catelyn prayed to the old gods. She begged for Bran, for Rickon, for Arya, for Sansa. But the trees didn't whisper anymore. The north was quiet, distant, cold. She finally saw it now. Robb hadn't killed the Lannisters to win. He killed them because he couldn't stop himself. He had avenged his father and lost himself in the process. The banners of the north once stood proud above every fortress Robb took. The direwolf had become a symbol of vengeance and victory, but now it was becoming a shadow of fear. Men still followed Robb, but not because they loved him. They followed because they were too afraid to leave. Rumors spread fast. They said the king in the north had started talking to the heads of his enemies, that he kept Tywin Lannister's skull beside his bed like a trophy. That grey wind slept next to it, growling at anyone who dared look. Maybe it wasn't true. Maybe it was, but the truth didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that Robb Stark, the boy who once fought for his father's honor, had become something darker, something the gods themselves might fear. It started small. When a group of his men tried to desert near Lannisport, Robb had them caught and brought before him. One of them, a Karstark man, begged for mercy. "Your Grace," he said, "we've fought for years. We just want to go home." Robb didn't blink. "Home?" he said quietly. "Do you think I have a home?" Then he took the man's sword and drove it through his chest. The rest were hanged by dawn. Even the Greatjon stopped laughing after that. Catelyn tried to talk to him again. She came into his tent late one night, the fire low, the air heavy with smoke. Robb was sharpening his sword, staring at nothing. "You're losing them," she said softly. "Your men, your people, they'll follow me," he said. "For how long?" He didn't answer. You've killed your enemies, Robb, all of them. The Lannisters are finished. You've done what you set out to do." She hesitated, voice trembling. "Now come home, please. End this." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and for a heartbeat she saw the boy from Winterfell again. But it was gone as quickly as it came. "I can't," he said. "Not while lions still breathe." But there are no lions left. Robb stood and turned toward the fire. "Then I'll start killing foxes, snakes, and every vulture that fed on their scraps. Snakes and every vulture that fed on their scraps." The north had changed too. Winterfell had been rebuilt after the Boltons drove out the Ironborn. But Lord Roose Bolton had grown powerful, too powerful. He ruled the Dreadfort and the lands around it with cold precision. When word reached him that Robb was still fighting in the west, Bolton smiled. "A king who forgets the north," he said to his bastard son, Ramsay, "is no king at all." And so the letters began. Quiet messages carried by ravens. Promises of peace. Secret alliances. Bolton spoke to the Freys, to the crumbling southern lords. To any who were tired of bleeding for Robb's endless war, he whispered one name, Stark. If Robb would not return, the north would find another. Back in the west, another shadow crept close. Stannis Baratheon had taken Storm's End. His Red Priestess spoke of visions in the flames, visions of a wolf drowning in snow, his crown sinking beside him. "Strike now," Melisandre said. "The boy king's wrath has burned the west to ashes. He's weak, his army breaks. His mother weeps. The north will kneel if you kill its false wolf." And Stannis, grim and cold, prepared his march north. But Robb didn't know. He didn't care. All he saw were more enemies. When scouts found a hidden Lannister cousin, a child no older than 8, hiding with a scepter in the hills of the Westerlands, they brought her before him. The girl knelt, sobbing. "I didn't do anything," she cried. "I never even saw King's Landing, please." Catelyn stepped between them. "She's a child, Robb." But Robb just stared, silent and still. The camp waited for his word. After what felt like hours, he said, "Send her to the wall." The soldiers looked at one another in confusion. Catelyn's eyes softened. "Thank the gods," she whispered. Then Robb added, "And when she reaches it, make sure she never leaves, dead or alive." Catelyn turned away in horror. That night, grey wind howled louder than the wind itself. Some said he was warning them. Others said he was crying. The next morning, the snow began to fall again, heavier than before. From the south came reports that King's Landing was falling apart. Joffrey was dead, poisoned during his wedding feast. Cersei had vanished into the Red Keep, drunk on madness. And without Tywin, the crown was crumbling. But Robb didn't celebrate, he didn't laugh, he didn't even speak. He simply stared north, toward home, and whispered to himself, "All debts are paid," but they weren't, not yet. Because that very night a raven landed on his table. Its seal was black, the mark of the Dreadfort. The message was short. "Winterfell calls for its king. Come home, or there will be no north left to rule." And beneath it, signed in neat, sharp writing, "Roose Bolton, Warden of the North." Robb crumpled the letter in his fist. The firelight flickered in his eyes, and for the first time in months he smiled. But it wasn't a kind smile. It was sharp, cruel. "Then let the North remember," he said quietly. "The king is coming home!" Grey Wind growled low, almost as if he understood what was coming. The drums of war began again, not for the south, not for the Lannisters, but for the north itself. And this time, the blood that would fall would not be lion's blood. It would be wolf against wolf. The march back to the north was colder than Robb remembered. Snow drifted down in thick, heavy curtains. Horses stumbled through it, and men wrapped their cloaks tighter, muttering prayers under their breath. Every step closer to Winterfell felt like walking into a grave. Robb said little on the journey. He rode at the front, grey wind padding silently beside him. His eyes stayed fixed on the horizon, on that endless line of white where the land and sky became one. His mother rode behind him in silence. No one dared speak her grief aloud anymore. When they reached the borders of the north, the air itself seemed different, sharper, emptier. Villages were half deserted, doors barred. Some bowed as the king passed. Others turned away, afraid to meet his eyes. The songs that once praised the young wolf were gone. In their place came whispers, "The Butcher King returns." At the Dreadfort, Roose Bolton waited. He came down from his hall with his calm, pale face, the same polite half-smile that had fooled so many. "Your Grace," he said smoothly, "the North is yours as always. I'm merely its humble keeper until your return." Robb looked at him for a long moment before answering. "Then keep it well, Lord Bolton. We march to Winterfell at dawn." Bolton inclined his head. "As you command." That night the feast began. Tables groaned under the weight of roasted meat and steaming bread, though the hall felt colder than the snow outside. Northern lords filled the benches, laughing too loudly, drinking too fast. They were glad to see their king again, or pretending to be. Catelyn sat beside her son, uneasy. She could feel something wrong in the air. Every smile looked rehearsed, every cheer forced. The candles trembled in their holders. Roose raised his cup. "To the king in the north, who has ended the lion's roar forever." The hall erupted in applause. Robb nodded, but his eyes never left Bolton's. "And to those who still remember what it means to be loyal," he said. A ripple of unease passed through the crowd. Bolton's smile never wavered. Later, when the feast quieted, he approached Robb privately. "You've won many battles, Your Grace, but the North bleeds. The Karstarks question your rule, the Freys refuse your calls, and the South gathers again. Perhaps a softer hand might heal what your sword cannot." Robb's expression hardened. "My sword built this kingdom. It will keep it standing." Bolton bowed slightly. "Of course." But as he turned away, his eyes were cold as the snow outside. 2 nights later they reached Winterfell. What was once home now looked like a ruin patched together by strangers. The walls were scarred from the Ironborn's fire. The great hall smelled of smoke and pine pitch. Yet when Robb walked through the gates, every sound in the courtyard stopped. The people stared. For a moment hope flickered. Maybe their king had truly returned. Robb raised his hand. "The North is safe," he said. "No Lannister lives to threaten us again. You can sleep without fear." But his voice carried no warmth, and even his victory sounded like a warning. That night, Catelyn prayed in the godswood. The heart tree's red leaves whispered above her, but she heard no answer. She looked up through her tears and whispered, "Bring my son back to me." The boy who laughed in these woods. Only the wind replied. Inside, Robb stood before Ned Stark's tomb. The flicker of the torches cast his shadow long and thin across the stone floor. "I've done what you couldn't, Father," he murmured. "They're gone. Every one of them. I kept my word." But in the echo of his own voice, he heard something hollow. Behind him, Grey Wind lifted his head and growled. The sound was low, uncertain, not a warning, but a question. By morning, ravens were already flying south. Bolton had begun moving quietly, sending messages sealed with his flayed man's sigil. He told the Freys that the time was right. He told the Crown that he could deliver them the North without another drop of southern blood. In Winterfell's great hall, he stood beside Robb and watched him give orders to rebuild the burned towers. Every command sounded tired. The men obeyed, but slowly. They were waiting for something. A spark, a sign, anything to tell them that their king still lived behind those eyes. But all they saw was a man haunted by ghosts. That evening, a storm rolled in from the sea. The sky turned the color of iron, and the wind howled through the cracks in the walls. Catelyn found her son standing on the battlements, snow gathering in his hair. "The men are uneasy," she said. "They say the Boltons bring bad omens. Let them go home, Robb. Let us all go home." He didn't turn to look at her. "There's no home left, Mother. There's only the crown, and it's heavier than ever." Below them, in the flicker of torchlight, Roose Bolton watched from the courtyard. His bastard stood beside him, face half hidden by the storm. "The wolf grows thin," Ramsay said quietly. "Shall I take the bite from him?" "Not yet," Bolton replied. "Let him march a little farther into the snow. When he cannot tell friend from foe, then we strike. And the North will kneel to the flayed man. That night, thunder rolled over Winterfell, and the wind carried with it the faint, distant sound of wolves crying somewhere in the dark. Catelyn couldn't sleep. She dreamed of a river running red, of banners burning, of her son standing alone in the snow while voices whispered his name. When she woke, she thought she heard those same whispers outside her chamber door, but when she opened it, there was nothing. Only cold air and the echo of boots fading down the corridor. Somewhere far below in the stables, grey wind began to snarl. Grey wind began to snarl. Snow swallowed the world. Winterfell lay buried under white silence, its towers ghostly against a storm-dark sky. The wind moaned through the gates, sounding almost like the howl of wolves that once guarded these walls. Inside the hall, torches fought the cold with flickering orange light. Robb sat at the long table, crown resting beside his untouched cup. The firelight caught the silver in his hair, too much for a boy his age. Grey wind paced restlessly at his side. The storm outside kept most men in their tents, but Bolton soldiers moved easily through the keep. Their boots made no sound on the stone floors. They carried no banners, only quiet looks that never reached their eyes. Catelyn felt it first, the stillness before a blade falls. She had been writing letters by candlelight when the flame began to shake. Somewhere below, a door slammed. She rose, heart pounding. From the corridor came muffled shouts, then silence. When she reached the great hall, Robb was already on his feet. "What's happening?" she asked. He looked toward the main doors. "Something's wrong." A single figure appeared in the archway, a man drenched with snow, face pale. "Your Grace," he gasped. "Bolton's men." An arrow struck him through the throat. He fell without a sound. The doors burst open. Dozens of men poured in, armored in dull grey, their sigils hidden. The hall filled with the clash of steel and the smell of cold air and smoke. Robb grabbed his sword. Grey wind leapt forward, teeth flashing. Chaos erupted. Catelyn screamed his name, but her voice was lost in the roar. "Traitors!" Robb shouted, his blade cutting through the first man who came near. "You dare raise arms against your king?" But the attackers didn't answer. They moved with eerie calm, striking and retreating, surrounding him. Through the haze of firelight, Roose Bolton stepped into view. His expression was as calm as ever. "Your Grace," he said almost gently, "the North remembers. It remembers who broke it. You?" Robb spat. "You think the North will follow you?" "The North follows whoever keeps it alive." Bolton's voice was soft, reasonable, the tone of a man discussing business, not betrayal. "You burned the West, you bled us dry. There is nothing left to rule." Behind him, Ramsay moved like a shadow, sealing the doors. Catelyn rushed to Robb's side. "Stop this! You swore oaths." Bolton tilted his head. "Oaths are for men who can afford them." Grey wind's snarl tore through the hall. The great wolf threw himself at the nearest soldier, scattering them like leaves. Swords flashed, torches fell, smoke curled toward the rafters. Bolton didn't flinch. "End it," he said quietly. The fight was short, brutal, confused, and then, as quickly as it began, it was over. When Robb opened his eyes again, the hall was empty. The fires had burned low. His sword lay beside him, chipped and dark. Grey wind was gone. So was Bolton. Only the wind answered through the broken doors. He tried to stand, but pain lanced through his body. His hands were raw, his breath a cloud of frost. Catelyn knelt beside him, her face streaked with soot and tears. "We have to run," she whispered. "There's still time." "Where?" he asked. "North." "The wall. Jon will—" Robb shook his head. "Jon has his own war." Then faintly from outside the hall came the sound of horns. Not Bolton's, not his own. Deep, slow, unfamiliar. Catelyn turned toward the sound. "What is that?" Another horn answered, closer now, followed by shouts echoing over the walls. Men poured into the courtyard, shouting about a host approaching from the east. At first, Robb thought it was Bolton's reinforcements, until he saw the banners. Black Stag, Red Heart aflame, Stannis Baratheon. Bolton's coup had come too late. The Stormlord's army had arrived in the blizzard, thousands strong, cutting through the night like a tide of fire and steel. Robb staggered to his feet. "Get the men!" "We hold the gate." "Robb, go!" He limped through the hall, through the ruined doors, into the storm. Snow whipped against his face, freezing in his hair. The yard below was chaos again. Bolton's men scrambling to meet the sudden attack, torches falling into drifts. Stannis' soldiers crashed through the outer gate, their war cries carried on the wind. The night turned to fire. Robb raised his sword one last time. "The North stands!" he shouted. He didn't know if anyone heard him. Catelyn's voice carried faintly through the storm. "Robb, please!" But the world was already vanishing into white. The snow, the smoke, the sound of wolves far away, somewhere above. The ravens circled. By morning, Winterfell was a ruin again. No one truly knew what happened in that blizzard. Some said Robb fell defending the gate beside his direwolf. Others swore they saw him ride north through the storm. Wounded but alive. When the snows cleared, Bolton's banners were gone, and Stannis held the castle for a time before the winter drove even him back to the coast. All that remained was stories of a king who avenged his father, who destroyed the lions, who lost his soul to the war he won. They said that on the coldest nights, when the wind howls across the battlements, you can still hear a wolf pacing the walls, waiting for a boy who will never return. And when the wind whispers through the godswood, it carries only 3 words: the North remembers. Years passed. The snows melted slowly, but they melted. And when they did, the North was not the same. Winterfell stood again, not as a proud castle, but as a scarred reminder of all that had been lost. The walls were blackened in places. One tower never got rebuilt. The heart tree in the godswood grew twisted and tall, but its face was cracked, as though the old gods themselves had cried for what had happened here. No one ever found Robb Stark's body. When the snowstorm that swallowed Winterfell finally cleared, neither the young wolf nor grey wind were seen again. Some said Stannis burned their remains. Others whispered Bolton dragged the bodies away before he fell. But most agreed on one thing: Robb Stark died with his sword in hand, or so the bards sang. The truth, like most truths in the North, got buried under layers of snow and silence. Catelyn Stark never left. Winter fell. She ruled in silence from a grey chamber overlooking the yard, dressed in black every day until her hair turned the colour of ash. She rarely spoke, rarely smiled. The courtiers feared her like they once feared the cold itself. She never called herself queen, only mother of the North each year on the same night, the night of the betrayal. She lit a single candle in the godswood and sat beneath the weirwood for hours, speaking to no one. Only the wind listened. She had no sons left. No word ever came from Jon at the wall, no sign of Rickon. And Bran had vanished long ago, with only broken dreams and crows in his wake. But sometimes, deep in the night, she swore she heard a wolf howling just beyond the walls. One voice, distant and constant, as if still circling its home. Roose Bolton's name was never spoken again. The northern lords stripped the Dreadfort of its titles. Ramsay's fate was a mystery. Some said he died in the snow, others that Stannis fed him to his own dogs. Whatever the truth, no one mourned him. The flayed man's sigil was burned in every village that once flew it. In its place rose a new one, the direwolf of House Stark. Not polished and regal, but wild, teeth bared, painted in red and black, the wolf of war. Stannis Baratheon did not hold the north for long. The winter broke his supply lines, starved his men, and scattered what was left of his army. He fled south before spring, never returning. The north did not kneel to him, nor did it kneel to the crown. It stood alone, cold and bitter, bound by pain. A council of northern houses ruled in Robb's name. Lords from Bear Island, White Harbour, and Deepwood Motte took seats beneath cracked banners. No one trusted each other, but no one dared challenge the memory of the boy who had once united them. Every decision they made began with the same words. What would the young wolf have done? In taverns and hearths across Westeros, stories of Robb Stark only grew. Some told tales of a king who struck down Tywin Lannister in his own halls. Others swore that he fought 100 men at Winterfell before vanishing into the snow like a ghost. Singers painted him as a tragic hero. His downfall wasn't blamed on cruelty. No, they said he had been broken by grief, by the loss of his father, by betrayal, by a war that demanded too much from a boy who wanted only justice. And yet, his justice had cost too much. Children buried fathers. Towns burned for the name of Stark. In the Reach, they called him the Wolf King. In the Westerlands, they still spat at his name. In King's Landing, the new queen forbade any bard from playing songs about him. But in the north, where the wind carried memories like fallen leaves, Robb Stark had become more than a king. He had become a warning. One night, years later, a traveller arrived at Winterfell. Hooded, quiet, alone, he stayed at the inn just outside the gates and asked for nothing but bread and fire. When the innkeep asked his name, he only replied, "No one." But the next morning, he left behind a carving on the inn's hearth, a direwolf, standing over a lion's broken crown, and next to it, 3 words burned into the wood: "The North remembers, far, far beyond the wall in the land of endless white." A pack of wolves ran beneath the aurora skies. Among them, one moved slower, older but larger than the rest, its fur streaked with grey, its eyes full of storms, and if you listened long enough to the wind there, you'd swear it whispered a name, Robb. Whispered a name, Robb.